Today, we have a very special guest with us, Eli Pollard. We go back a few years now, and it's really good to have you with me, Eli. And for the folks listening out there, a lot of you know I'm involved very much in the world of Parkinson's and helping people to move better, live better, and traveled a lot around the world and teach. But I tell you, one of the best conferences I ever went to was the World Parkinson Congress in 2016, Portland, Oregon. And we're here with Eli Pollard, who's the executive director of the World Parkinson's Coalition. And next year is the 7th World Parkinson Congress in Phoenix, Arizona, from May 24th to May 27th, so 2026, at the Phoenix Convention Center. And for information about this, which you're going to get during our talk today, go to WPC, as in World Parkinson Congress, WPC2026.org, or link from my website, carlstarling.com. That's Carl with a K. Eli, it's great to have you with me. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much, Carl. It's so great to see you after all these years.
I know it's been a while. I'm thinking back to Kyoto, interviewing you maybe 9-10 months prior to Kyoto, Japan, which I was in your office, and then one of our she's, I think, on your board maybe, is Omotola Thomas.
Yeah, she's on our board now. At that time, you just introduced me to her. Now
I met up with her and her kids, and the family. They were traveling here in the States, and she, at the time, and I think she's still in England, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Her husband was working, so I met up with her and the two beautiful kids, came to your office, and that was really fun.
Yeah,
and she lives with Parkinson's. For those people who are familiar with Omotola, she is a fighter. But it's been at least 7 years since I've seen you. So
it's been a while. Yeah.
Well, you've done such great work. And just, not that we need to talk about this, I'll just say I was ready to go to Kyoto. I was all registered, and I was teaching in Singapore and going to go direct to Japan. And but when I arrived at Singapore, I had massive blood clot. And
it's scary.
I was out. I had to stay 2 weeks. They wouldn't let me travel. So I missed it. But anyways, tell us, first of all, what's going on in the world of the work that you do, because there's so much going on, but I don't know that, we don't hear it on the mainstream news. So I'd love to have you share with us, like, what's happening in the world of Parkinson's as far as just all things. You've got medications, you got therapies, you got support groups are huge, right? What's happening, my friend?
Well, I mean, gosh, where to even start? There's a lot going on. And I think that I look back over the last 21 years since I've been in this position. And just a reminder, when we started the World Parkinson Coalition and we had the first World Parkinson Congress, which is the only and still the only totally inclusive global conference on Parkinson's where everyone is invited to participate. That first Congress was in 2006 in Washington, D.C. And now we're going into the 7th one, of course, in Phoenix, like you said. Just a reminder that back in 2006, when we had that first World Parkinson Congress, this is how far we've come in the last, 16 years since that first Congress, is people were just starting to talk about non-motor symptoms. Like we had a, everyone still talked about Parkinson's as a motor symptom. It's called a motor disease. You're a movement disorder doctor if you treat people with Parkinson's. It's a motor. They were motor symptoms. It's a movement disease. But in 2006, people started talking about non-motor symptoms. And there were people who were, I would say, doubters. Like, what do you mean non-motor symptoms? It's a movement disorder. And so there's been just incredible, it's mind-boggling to see where we've come from, right? We had one session on non-motor symptoms. It was a room for around 500 people. And the fire brigade, or whatever we call them, the fire safety team, had to close the doors because the room was too full at capacity, because everyone was fascinated about this thing called non-motor symptoms. And if you look back at things like PubMed, back in 2006, I think there were just a handful of articles published. And I think, last year alone, there were maybe, hundreds and hundreds of articles. So we've moved somewhat quickly. I think if you're a person with Parkinson's, it may not feel quickly. because you're living with a chronic degenerative disease and nothing moves fast enough. But I think when you look at where we've come from, there's so much focus now on, beyond the motor symptoms, all the non-motor symptoms. And we're learning so much about the reality of people with Parkinson's living with pain, and more about fatigue, and more about vision problems. I just read an article the other week about potential hearing impact. Your hearing might be impacted.
No kidding.
Yeah, no kidding. And then I heard about this great article yesterday where some psychologists teamed up with some physical therapists, and they did they explored the impact of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, on anxiety and decreasing fear of falls and freezing of gait. And they said, if we do CBT and we do therapy, I mean, this is what I mean, an example of how far we've come. Like, before, they weren't even talking about, like, there was a therapy. No one was talking about CBT or psychotherapy at all. Now there are people, and it was just a first tiny little study with just a few people who were dealing with pretty debilitating anxiety. And one of the things that they were afraid of was falling, fear of falling, or they were dealing with real freezing of gait. And they said, well, if we address your anxiety, will that help lessen this fear of falling and this help you navigate with freezing of gait? I think that's kind of cool, amazing. Just people are thinking out of the box. And what I loved about that was that, because it's at the heart of what we do, it was two different disciplines coming together and sharing their knowledge and their experience. And that's why we designed the World Parkinson Congress, was about, let's interdigitate the community, because people are not talking to each other. And if you're not communicating with each other, you're not going to come up with these innovative ideas about, let's do some CBT, some cognitive behavioral therapy, and see if it impacts fear of falling. And can we help address that? So that's kind of cool stuff happening in that space. And then I think the big things really right now are so much around genetics. I mean, there's a real deep dive on genetics right now, and groups like the Parkinson's Foundation and others are looking at genetics. And years ago when I first started, I'll never forget a conversation at the very first World Parkinson Congress. We had a professor there named John Hardy. He's British. He was at the time working at NIH. He's back in the UK somewhere for many years now. And I remember someone teased him and they said, John, why are you here? You're a geneticist. Parkinson's is not a genetic disease. And they were sort of teasing and bantering. And he looked right at the person. He said, it's not a genetic disease yet. We hadn't found it yet, but trust me, we're finding it. We're going to find it. And so what's interesting is that Parkinson's is still not considered, it's not a genetic disease. It's not like Huntington's disease, where you have a genetic marker and you will at some point get Huntington's. Parkinson's is not like that. But what I will say is that the research that's been going on, people used to say around 6% of people might have a genetic connection to Parkinson's through the family, like a familial sort of genetic connection to Parkinson's.
Sure.
And that was the number for many years. People just they cited that without real evidence. So now, after like 5-6 years, the Parkinson's Foundation has actually been doing this PD gene project. And now they came out with a paper and they're like, yeah, it's more like 13%. 13% of people actually have a genetic marker. That's incredible. I mean, 6% to 13%, that's a real difference. So now what I think is so amazing about that is, if you were a researcher and you were trying to look at a particular group of people who had, say, a particular genetic implication like LRRK2 or PINK1 or these other genetic implications, you can then go to the Parkinson's Foundation and say, we'd like to do research with these people. Can we work with you to identify them quickly? Because rather than us do our own study to find 100 people to do this study, can we work with you to get the people and implement a study? So they're going to move research more quickly, right? They're not going to have to go out and look for 100 people with those genetic markers. They're going to be able to find them quickly. So I think there's a lot of progress with that. And the other thing, of course, is biomarkers, is trying to diagnose Parkinson's early. And
oh yeah, that's a big one. That's a really big one. In fact, we're going to go to break in just a few seconds here, but one of the things I've found, and I don't mean this in any negative or condescending or disparaging way, is it's not necessarily the easiest thing to diagnose, from what I am told. I'm not a doctor, but early diagnosis can really change how everything plays out for them in the future. So we're with Eli Pollard, the executive director of World Parkinson Coalition. You're listening to Your Health Matters here on News Radio 570 WSYR, also available on 106.9. Stay with us, folks. We got a lot more to talk about after this short break. We are back with Eli Pollard, and you hit on so many things there just in a few minutes. It's huge. Like, let's go back for just a moment. I know that not I'm just quoting old stats, or at least what I was told by a lot of different fairly renowned neurologists. For example, depression seemed to be like the number one non-motor symptom for the longest time, followed by anxiety. Statistically, I don't know if they rank like that, but either way, what we have found, and you put this together beautifully in the first segment, is when people have anxiety, there are more fears that things, fatigue sets in faster, and if they're depressed, they're usually not standing all upright and robust. They might be leaned forward. So if you look at the depression coupled with maybe some anxiety and fatigue, and God only knows what else, maybe they're constipated. That's another one that people are constipated, right? I mean, they could have a lot of cramping and their organs aren't working right, and then they hunch forward even more. I know, folks, that sounds like too much information, but it's not, because it's a reality, and this is what we talk about on this show, is reality. And what can we do to help people? Okay, so they're at a higher fall risk just with any one or more of those conditions paired up. So that is interesting. Now, when we look at, actually, where does depression fall now? Is there a stat where it ranks as a non-motor symptom?
I should know this. I would say it's in the top 3,
Okay.
but I don't know if it's still number 1, but it's definitely depression, anxiety, apathy, and
Big ones.
or set up, I think, shuffle around in place in the top couple spots. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I found interesting, that this is a long time ago, I'm used to this at this point, but I want to make sure we make a distinction for people listening, or if you're on YouTube watching, then thank you. But either way, it's Parkinson's is often associated with just the tremor. For, let's say, just the person who doesn't know much about it, or maybe hardly anything about it. And yes, there could be a tremor, and there oftentimes is, but geez, people, I know people, decades with Parkinson's, no tremor. So that's just one.
Yep.
Uh,
It's like
just
25%. Around 25% of people have no tremor.
Yeah, interesting. And it could be long term. I remember I was with a lady in Detroit over 40 years. She's still functioning really well. She just combats it. She's fighting back against it and moving a lot, and no tremor. But so let's move forward now. I'm kind of curious with these Dr. Dorsey from Rochester, I think Ray Dorsey.
Right.
He was also saying that the genetic component to it, let's say inherited, for lack of better words, is much less than the exposure component, as far as he knows, as of a year ago. How are they looking at it this point? Because this was about a year ago, he and I talked. What are they looking at in terms of, let's say, exposure, or maybe long-term exposure to toxins and this and that, whether it's mold or paraquat or whatever. In addition to, is there any research on the coupling of, let's say, genetic mutations as a result of exposure?
Well, these are great questions.
Those are loaded, right?
And because I'm not a researcher and a doctor, I don't necessarily feel qualified to talk so much about that. But I will say that there's always been a belief that Parkinson's is often triggered by an environmental toxin on the body. So even before Dr. Dorsey started doing all of his incredible work and his book around ending Parkinson's with Dr. Oken and Dr. Blum and Todd Shearer, there's always been a belief. There just hasn't been a lot of evidence to show that, though there are a ton of epidemiologists looking at environmental impact. There's always been a belief that it is an environmental trigger that brings on Parkinson's, especially for people who don't have a genetic marker, right? What is your cause of Parkinson's? So it's some sort of environmental trigger. There is so much research going on, and the paraquat is a big one. And I know that there was some great success last year about moving forward the possibility of banning paraquat in the United States, but right now I know that's being reevaluated with our current administration, so I don't know what's actually happening with that. There was a lot of advocacy and effort to go around banning that. It is banned in, I think, pretty much almost every other country around the world, almost all.
Interesting.
So that would be, I mean, one step forward in that fight. But like you said, it's not just paraquat. There are all sorts of environmental toxins, and I think it's almost impossible to avoid some of them nowadays. I mean, everyone has plastic in their body, supposedly.
Yeah, right.
I heard a study recently that they were like, we're going to study plastics in a human, and we were looking for a control group, but we couldn't find a single control group without plastics to do the, which is depressing, but it's the reality that we're in. So I think it's hard. So you just have to make good choices, and sometimes even the choices you make, you just have to do the best you can.
Yeah, yeah. She takes me back. There's so many directions we could go here, but let's talk for a minute about, for example, we know that early diagnosis is absolutely a game changer. And one of the things I find, and again, I'm never here to sound condescending or be condescending, but the reality is, well, even our friend Laura. I talk about Laura on the show a lot because she's one of my closest friends. And she is, in my opinion, she is the example that Dr. Ray Dorsey talked about last year. He doesn't know her, but he talks about, he exercises 1 hour a day. If he had Parkinson's, he would exercise 2 hours a day. Laura actually does this. She'll go 3 hours. When we travel together and I'm with her and she's translating for me, I cannot keep up with that girl. And I'm pretty fit. So, but okay, let's go back. She did not get diagnosed soon enough.
Yep.
Our friend Omotola, same thing.
Yep.
There's so many people I've heard. I mean, personally, the person I know who took the longest to get diagnosed is Ian Frizzell, Northern England.
Yeah.
Was at his house up there interviewing him a few years ago, and 16 years.
It's tricky.
So is there anything happening in the arena of earlier diagnosis or any kind of biomarkers or tests that we can do to help?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a super exciting area. And I was just touching on that in the last segment. Yeah, so I think the examples that you gave about the challenges of being diagnosed, and for the listeners who know Parkinson's, this won't surprise them. And those who don't know Parkinson's, this may surprise them, is that there are, around 10% of people who are under the age of 50 who are diagnosed with Parkinson's. And if you look at under the age of 40, it's around 4 or 5% of people under the age of 40 diagnosed with Parkinson's. Those are the best statistics we have. And so if you're 40 and you've got some of these symptoms that people with Parkinson's have, but you don't have the tremor, right? So let's say we said earlier, 25% of people don't have a tremor, which is often the first symptom people look for. So let's say you're 40 and you have no tremor, but you have all these other weird symptoms, like you're kind of stiff, you're dealing with a lot of fatigue, you have constipation, you're depressed. Like, that does not necessarily ring bells for your average doctor. And remember, in the United States, only 10% of people, 9% actually, see a movement disorder specialist. So they're people with additional training in Parkinson's. 50% of people see a neurologist, which is good, but not every neurologist has the proper training. And then like almost 30% of people see a family physician that may have little to no additional training. So diagnosis is really tough. So one of the exciting things is that there are diagnostic tests now that are being deployed. One of them is a skin biopsy. A company in Arizona, they take 3 little skin samples from the neck and 2 other places on the body, and they look at the cell structure, and they can tell, based on the alpha-synuclein, what they're seeing within the cells, if someone is likely to have Parkinson's. It's like a 95% accuracy rate. And then the Michael J. Fox Foundation is doing work around cerebral spinal fluid. Those are good. If you can get a proper actual biological test rather than just a clinical test, it allows people to start getting treated earlier. So that's what we would love to see happen in the next future years, early in the next few years.
Oh, sure.
See that implemented.
That I didn't know about the skin biopsy. That's really cool.
Yep.
And actually, this conference is going to be in Phoenix, Arizona next year. So just not that it matters, but that's where you
actually that company is already planning to do a tour of their building. So people who do go,
oh really? Oh, that's really, I gotta go.
We'll talk about their research and the skin biopsy. So they're going to do a lot of open house stuff to tell people about their research.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna head out to break. This is Your Health Matters. We'll be back to talk more with Eli Pollard. I'm sorry, Executive Director, World Parkinson Coalition. Be back after this short break. Eli, it's really good to connect with you because you're at the forefront of you're in the leader of the pack, in my opinion, anyways. I mean, you're dealing with neurologists, you're dealing with Parkinson's, fight people living with it, and you're out there receiving all this great information and putting together this conference, which you've been doing now for a while, since the first one, right?
21 years. Yep.
So, I mean, this is an extensive set of knowledge and exposure to learning and learning and learning, and then helping us to understand better. It's so great that this organization exists and this conference is going to happen. So with that said, I want to go back to the diagnosis part. Now, one of the things that I'm saying this solely because it happens, I am not a doctor, but I will tell you, one of the things that's disturbing, two disturbing things. Somebody who is not yet diagnosed with Parkinson's, who comes in and just is having balance issues, and maybe I suspect it's Parkinson's, so we try to refer to some neurologist, usually in Rochester, not Syracuse, where I am. Sorry, Syracuse, that's just the way it is. Rochester is better. But and see if they can, accelerate testing and get some accurate diagnosis, because it's so important. But on the flip side, there are the people who come in diagnosed, they don't have it. And I'll tell you, this is something that happens. And we have a lot diagnosed with it who do have it too, but we have had countless people come in diagnosed with Parkinson's. They're not even asking, I don't necessarily want you to speak to this unless you want to, Eli, but when I say, I'm not a doctor, but I really wonder if you should see, who did you see so far? Oh, just my family doctor. Okay, well, great. Could be great, but I think something else is going on. And they go to Rochester usually, and there many times they come out and are like, I'm so happy I don't have Parkinson's. They did a DET scan. They did this and that. I got something else. I mean, diagnosis accurately is so important, as sooner is better, of whatever you're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I think just for listeners who may not understand, so Parkinson's right now, there's no simple test. You don't just get, and that's why we were talking recently, just about the skin biopsy test. That is a potential biological test in this cerebral spinal fluid, which is a mouthful whenever I say it. That would be another example of a test that you could get a good diagnostic. It's not 100%, but it's in the mid 90s, 95%.
So good.
Which is amazing. And the skin biopsies, so exciting to me because it's just a tiny little sample and they put a little Band-Aid on it and then you go on your way and they can tell you. But for people who don't know, right now, really the only way to test people completely in a clinic is, it's a clinical exam. So you go in and the doctor looks at you and has you do all these various activities like tap your fingers or walk down the hall. I'm going to watch how you walk down the hall. And then they have you do a writing sample. They do a pull test where they stand behind you and they pull you back kind of abruptly to see if you can catch yourself. Because if you don't have Parkinson's, you should be able to catch yourself. And if you do, you might stumble backwards. So that's not a perfect test. And even the only way you can 100% know someone has Parkinson's is on autopsy. And that's not what we all want to do, right?
Yeah. That's a little late stage.
They've figured out that even movement disorder doctors who are trained to diagnose movement disorders like Parkinson's disease, their personal diagnostic accuracy rate's like 92%. So that means 8% of people, even by the experts, are not getting diagnosed properly. So then if you go to maybe a neurologist who's good, they've studied the brain, but they're not Parkinson's trained, their diagnostic accuracy rate's going to go down. And then, like you said, a family physician. I mean, family physicians they got so much on their plate. And nowadays it's so stressful. You're studying hundreds of things. So they're doing the best they can. But that's why it's important that upon a first diagnosis by someone, you get a second opinion by a movement disorder doctor. Even they're not perfect, but they have more access. They have access to more potential tests and information to give you a better diagnostic rate. But to be able to get a biological test like a skin test that you
Yeah.
literally can, they go to your doctor, the company sends them the thing, they take the skin test, they send it back to the company, they analyze it, and then they tell you, we're 95% sure you do or don't have this. That is a game changer. And like you said, if you can get a diagnosis a little earlier, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then you can change your exercise regimen. You can maybe start exercising if you're not,
Yeah.
or you can increase it. Like Dr. Dorsey said, he would do more exercise. You can also think about your diet because, like you mentioned, Carl, lots of people with Parkinson's deal with GI issues like
Yeah.
constipation. And so then you can start thinking about, like, all right, I got to drink more water every day. I have to eat more fruit every day. I need more fiber. So you can start making decisions that will change your trajectory with the disease. And you can start to see rehabilitation specialists. We call it prehabilitation, right? Don't
Yeah.
wait until the problem happens to see a rehab specialist. So if I were diagnosed with Parkinson's today, I would build a care team. I would find a PT, I'd find an OT, an occupational therapist, I'd find a speech language pathologist. And I'd say, give me the exercises today. Help me figure out things today so that I can slow those things that eventually are going to happen to me, like potential speech problems, potential movement problems. Help me build a plan now so that I can slow that progression. I don't want to wait until I can't speak to go to a
No.
psychologist. It's
I mean,
prehabilitation. Start early.
this absolutely. I mean, you just stated it eloquently, beautifully. Start early. We talk about this all the time, friends. We talk about it every single week. And I use my own story of being 300 pounds, almost obese. I'm 6'2". I'm not supposed to weigh that much. The reason I got into this business 16 years ago is because 17 years ago, that was me, drunk, obese. Okay. I don't drink anymore forever. I haven't drank. I eat well. I lost my 70, 80 pounds. And I'm not special. It's just that I didn't want to die. I mean, I was on I had all kinds of health problems, and you already know this if you listen to the show, but the deal is this: I'm living preventatively now. So I don't want to have, anything, I don't want onset later. I want onset never if I'm prone to something happening. Whether it's Alzheimer's, which runs on my mother's side of the family, although she didn't have it, but her mom did, and her mom did, and I just don't want this to happen to me, and I don't want to be a burden to others down the road. And if it happens, well, I will have done a lot to stave it off. And I always say, I don't, oh man, sometimes I just probably say the same thing too often, people. I'm sorry. But, if I had a diagnosis of something, I'd be out there probably working out twice as much as I do, 3 times as much as I do. I'd be like Laura. 3 hours a day, I'd hit it. Now I got this lame 1 hour a day I do. I mean, it's better than nothing, but why wait for a diagnosis to start doing anything?
Yeah.
Prehabilitation, preventative living. I love it. We have 2 minutes before break. I'd love to start to lead into really talking about what the conference is. Okay, so just in less than a couple of minutes, just give us like the 40,000 foot view. I know it's an integration of a lot of things. What's it going to be like?
So the World Parkinson Congress, a meeting that happens every 3 or 4 years, it is the only international space where the entire Parkinson's community is invited to come together to learn, share, build collaboration and connections. So when I say that, I'm not talking about just people with Parkinson's. What I'm talking about is a scientific meeting for neuroscientists, world-renowned neuroscientists, world-renowned clinical researchers, people doing the research in the clinic, and then the whole spectrum of clinicians. So the physical therapist, occupational therapist, nurse, social worker, speech, everyone, nutritionist, they all come together. And most uniquely and most special about the meeting is that people with Parkinson's and their care partners or family members also are invited in. And we started this in 2006, and it's, it was kind of a test to see if people would even come. And Dr. Fahn, our founder, said, I don't know if people are going to come to this, but I think we're ready for an interdigitated, he loved that word, interdigitated meeting. I used to tease him. I was like, I don't think that's a real word, actually. And he's like, well, I'm making it up because we're using it. It's an interdigitated meeting. And we think it will create unique outcomes. And it really has. So it's really exciting. We're coming back to the US for the first time in 10 years, or North America for the first time in 10 years. It'll be in Phoenix, Arizona in May.
Of 2026, just to clarify. So this is good. We'll give all the details and a link again in the next segment. We're with Eli Pollard. She's the World Parkinson Coalition Executive Director, and you're listening to Your Health Matters here on News Radio 570 WSYR. We'll be back with one more segment with Eli after this short break. All right, we're back for the last segment with our special guest, Eli Pollard, Executive Director, World Parkinson Coalition. So I have a little story for you. I don't know if you know Dr. Massimo Morano, who is based in Italy.
Only by name.
Okay, I met him through Alfonso Fasano, Dr. Fasano, who's, I think, still in Toronto. And wow, it was fun. Actually, it was Alfonso and 3 other guys from Italy and me at an Italian restaurant on the northwest side of Manhattan. I didn't know it took so long to eat dinner. We had a blast. It was 4 neurologists and me. This is like 7 or 8 years ago. And then Massimo says, I'll meet you. Massimo says, you come to Columbia tomorrow. You meet Dr. Font. I'm like, okay. So I got to meet Dr. Font.
Yeah.
Comes in, we sat for half an hour, Massimo, Dr. Font, and me, talking about all kinds of things, and even things he was really interested in, barefoot stimulation for sensory input to wake up the brain and stabilize, better output of signals, stabilizing people to balance and move better. We do a lot of that here. But anyways, Dr. Font is an icon.
Yeah.
And just, he's really the one who is the force behind starting this back in the beginning, right? The World Parkinson Congress. And
Yeah.
just a side note real quick is I remember him telling me stories about Oliver Sacks, that they were like best friends. So, I mean, the whole movie of The Awakening, I think, and,
Yeah.
and the book.
They're very good friends.
Oh my gosh, the stories Dr. Font has. Well, let's talk more about this interdigitation, whatever that is, the word you said. I think it is a word, and I love that word. I'm going to start to use it after I learn how to say it. Interdigitation meeting, World Parkinson Congress, May 24th to May 27th, 2026, Phoenix, Arizona. Tell us more. The one I went to in Portland was just epic. It was beautiful. I can't wait for next year.
Thank you. It's so it's a scientific conference, and that's at the heart and the core of what we're bringing people together for. So it's always about the science, whether that's basic science, clinical science, science around care and new better quality of life. So in a nutshell, the Congress has various tracks that people can participate in, educational tracks, so basic science talks, clinical science talks, comprehensive care talks, or these roundtable rooms. But the what we do with the meeting is we don't strong arm anyone into where they go. So anyone can go to any talk they want to go to. So if you're not a basic scientist, but you see a talk on genetics and you want to go and listen, you can go into that session. And we actually code every session so okay, this is basic science and it's really high level, or this is clinical science and it's moderately difficult, but I probably can keep up with the conversation. So we create this incredible space where people are constantly crossing paths, communicating, interdigitating, as we say. And we've got the core science program, and even the roundtables are really fun. We started those at the WPC 2013 in Montreal, and we took them to Portland. So you would have probably seen those in Portland. What we do with all these amazing speakers in the main scientific program, we pull them into this room. It's a roundtable room, and we have them sit at a table with like 11 people. They're a host and 11 people, and they can continue to talk to people. So if you see a plenary session, plenary speaker, you go into those big halls with 1,000 people and someone goes up and gives a talk, and then you never see them again, right? When you go to these conferences, they run in, they give their talk, and then they're gone. That is not how the WPC works. We are there. People are there for the week. They're there for the 4 days, right? Because what I'll do is I'll ask the plenary speaker, okay, after you give your plenary talk, then you're going to go into the roundtable room and you're going to host a table. So people can keep asking you questions. And then tomorrow you're going to moderate a session. And next day you're going to guide a poster tour. So people come and they stay. They don't rush in, use their thumb drive and give a talk and then rush off the stage and you don't see them again. You're there. You're part of the community. And I love one of our ambassadors this time, Edgar. He's so funny. I asked him a while ago, what did you like about the meeting? He's like, I got to talk to everybody. I got to talk to Dr. Dorsey, the famous Dr. Dorsey, and Dr. Oken and Boss Bloom. I saw them and they had a beer with me and we just talked. And I never get to do that at a conference. Like we got to I asked them questions. We talked, and His story really resonates with me because that's what we wanted to create as a space. But what's cool about it is that we know it's not just about the science. It's also about wellness and demonstrating and creating space for wellness. So not only can you go and participate in this great scientific program, amazing program, but then wrapped around the program, we have a whole program, we call it our wellness program. So we have a room that's called our renewal room where people do exercise all day long. And people like you, Carl, like people come in and do exercise classes. And it's about movement. It could be movement of your voice. It could be vocal class. It could be a physical movement. It could be a yoga class, Tai Chi, Qigong, whatever it is. People apply and invite them to host a class. So you can pop in, you could go to a scientific session on neuroplasticity of the brain and exercise. Then you could get up and say, oh, I'm feeling a little stiff. I got to move. Go to the renewal room, do an exercise, do a dance class.
That's cool.
Then you walk out, go to a round table and sit and talk to someone about something, freezing your gait. And then you go back to another room and play a competition of ping pong in our ping pong room. So the wellness program also exists. There's a care partner lounge for care partners, family members to learn as well, but also just to have a respite and talk to each other and find a support group, not just support group, but support network. So it's a real balance. And then of course the other program we have running through everything is creativity, because we think that art and creativity is really crucial to wellness. So it's music, dance, visual art. Exactly. So we also will have visual art, and we're launching a project this year called the Red Thread, based on the red thread theory or myth from Asia that we are all connected somehow by a red thread. And so we're going to do a whole exhibit around how we're all connected globally through this myth of the red thread. So it's a scientific congress at the heart of it, but we also focus and we include a lot around wellness, and we also include a lot around creativity. So it's super uplifting.
Yeah.
It's about what you can do with Parkinson's, what you can do as a researcher. And then it's just cross-pollinating people, right? It's making sure that the basic scientists see the physical therapist, who see the social workers, who see the people with Parkinson. So they're constantly talking and learning and building these cool and innovative alliances at the meeting. And then they go out and they do stuff afterward, which is really exciting.
I absolutely love it. I wrote down a word called accessibility. And then you talked about it, because one of the things I noticed, like, for example, I went in this room where we're standing room only, and Dr. Alfonso Vazana was speaking. Never heard of him. His speech was so eloquent that I found him on Facebook, sent him a note, and he said, "Oh, I'm sitting in the front row. Come up after the last speaker and we'll talk." I went up. We're friends to this day. 4 months later, I'm sitting in his office, Toronto Western, and I'm interviewing him. We went out to dinner, and we've been together a few times here and there teaching. But, and then one of the most fun moments was the same thing with Muhammad Ali's daughter, right? Eldest daughter, I believe. And she's going to come on the show in a month or so. She's got a new book I think she's putting out. But first of all, she was accessible. Next thing is, I was laughing so hard because she's so funny, my stomach hurt. It's like an ab workout. But the doctors, everybody, they are mingling, they're merging. We just have a little under 2 minutes left. And I love how, like, across the meeting, the accessibility, access to doctors, sit down, have a question, have a cup of coffee, have a beer, whatever. And they're there, and they're very accessible. So
I think it's also important that researchers, for people who may not be aware, but like basic scientists, they're not clinicians, so they don't see patients. So basic scientists who come to the meeting, for them, they're also blown away, because they're like, oh my God,
isn't that great?
An actual patient who can tell me what really matters to them. So that's a really super unique opportunity for the people with Parkinson's and the basic scientists as well.
It's beautiful. Well, Eli, I wish we could go longer and talk for hours, because like, let's do it again. I mean, way afraid of Congress. Maybe it's 2, 3, 4 months. Let's talk about it again, because there's so much here. I'm sure you'll have more on the agenda by then. But if you go to my website, folks, carlsterling.com, you can link right straight through to WPC2026.org and get information, or just go to what I just said. Eli, thanks a million.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much. I always talk about the WPC. I love the work I do. And the only drawback to my work is that I do it because people have Parkinson's, and I would love to put myself out of business. So let's find a, I can
love
close
it.
the door on the organization.
I love it. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Eli. And folks, thanks for listening. I appreciate you listening and supporting this show. This is Your Health Matters on News Radio 570 WSYR. Remember to move that body, use your brain every single day.